What up, y'all? Welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the Fuji X100V. What's new for this generation, the 5th generation, what it does best, what it kind of sucks at, and who is this camera best for? Let's get into it. Now this is the X100V, V standing for Generation 5, and every generation that Fuji has put out in the past has really done a good job improving on the design and what the camera does well. But in this 5th generation, they've really done almost a full redesign and really improved the things that the camera struggled with in the past. I just want to jump right into what's new for this 5th generation. First off, let's talk about the lens. This is a new and improved f2.0 35mm equivalent lens, and the lens has always been a gripe of mine with the X100 series in the past. I owned the original X100 and I think I owned the 3rd generation X100, both sold off not too long after I bought them. I've always loved the design and feel of the camera, but always struggled with the actual image quality that comes out of it. And part of that problem was the original lens that was on, the fixed lens that was on those generations. The old lens was a little bit soft. I found it to be a little bit slow in autofocus and especially soft around the corners. But what bugged me the most was when I opened it up all the way, it was really soft and kind of unusable. I found that it was more usable around f4 in those older generation lenses, and that kind of just bothered me and, limited me for my shooting style. The redesign is really nice, and Fuji really focused on sharpness. They even put out a statement saying that this lens is intentionally sharper all the way wide open at f2. That really makes it stand out from the older generations because now opening it up is fully usable, and I found that the images were crispy and just beautiful with a really nice bokeh, and that's what was lacking from the past generations. I found that you couldn't open it up, so you couldn't really get separation from the background and couldn't get a shallow depth of field that was pleasing to my eye without getting softness on your subject. But that's really changed with this new lens, and I now found it opened all the way up to f2, and you get really usable, beautiful images with a nice smooth fall off and beautiful bokeh all the way around. I also find that it doesn't lose its sharpness around the edges as much as in the past. You do lose some, but definitely not comparable, and still very usable images. So overall, I would say this new f2.0 35mm lens is a huge win and a huge reason to upgrade for Generation 5. Another huge upgrade for this generation is it's finally weather sealed. Now that's really important to some, but not to others. But what I think is really important to this camera in particular is because this is kind of a run and gun street photography camera, or a travel photography camera that you're gonna stick in your pocket or a small bag and take with you on your travels. And for that type of shooting, you really want weather sealed cameras. If I'm around anything like lakes or waterfalls or in any kind of dewy or foggy street environment, or heaven forbid rain, I would never take the X100 series of the past because they weren't weather sealed. But this new one really makes that a possibility now and makes it a viable option as an everyday carry camera. The one downfall I did see with weather sealing is that the front element does move around when you're turning the camera on and off or when you're focusing. So I could see how water or condensation can get in there, leading me to have some concerns with the weather sealing overall. But I did find a workaround. You could just buy a UV filter or some type of filter to put on the front of the camera, and that will seal off that one entrance point that I found a little bit troublesome. Moving on to more new features, the new touch screen is now tilting, so it can tilt up and tilt fully down. Now it does tilt up to about 90 degrees, but tilting down, it doesn't fully tilt the full 90 degrees as it hits the bottom. So I did find that when shooting overhead shots, it was still a little bit limiting, and I wished it tilted down a full 90 degrees to be able to get me a better angle. But I really love the tilting touchscreen on this generation, and I actually find it to be essential for any type of street photography. For me, it's because I get so low to the ground, I'm shooting a lot of low angles, and when you don't have that tilting feature, I tend to not want to get those angles, and my creativity tends to be hindered by the lack of being able to see the image, and I don't want to be getting down on the ground and crawling around to get my image, especially when I'm trying to do just quick run and gun shooting. Another new feature that I absolutely found a joy and was really a problem for me in the past generations of the X100 is the ISO control. Now, if you remember on the older X100s, to change your ISO, you would have to lift this dial here and then spin it while you're holding it up, and it caused a lot of just issues. You couldn't spin it fully all the way around, you couldn't change it quickly, and you couldn't change to drastic numbers. But on this new generation, you simply pop up the dial, you could spin it and change the ISO as much as you want or as little as you want. You don't need to continue to hold it up, and it just made it for a much more pleasant experience. More new features include eye autofocus, continuous eye autofocus for both video and stills. I just think that's so essential and makes it so much easier to be able to shoot, especially when you're shooting at your hip or something, or when shooting video, to not have to always worry about if you're getting your focus point. So that's a really nice welcome upgrade here. Speaking of modern era technology, this now can shoot full 4K video, and the 4K video is surprisingly really usable. I love it overall, and pair that with the eye autofocus, a mic jack. Even though the mic jack is not full size, you can change it to a 3.5mm mic jack with a small adapter, and you can also, while I'm on it, you could change the USB-C. You can get an adapter for that and make it a headphone jack. So you really have a lot of nice features for video here, and though I don't think of this camera as a video camera first, I definitely think it's a very usable video camera. All right, so this is 4K video coming out of the X100V. What do you guys think? I think it's a very usable video for 4K, and I'm just happy that they have the option at all, as well as eye autofocus and continuous focus. That does hunt a little bit, especially when I throw my hands up like this. You can tell it hunts a little bit, but overall I'd say it looks pretty good. This is the onboard audio. I didn't want to plug in any external audio because of course that would sound good, but I wanted you guys to hear just what it sounds like straight out of camera. The other thing to know is that in 4K you can only have a 10-minute record limit, so that might be a hindrance for some. But overall, as a travel compact camera, I'm just happy they have quality 4K coming out of this at all. Talking about slow motion, I was really impressed by the 1080p 120 frames per second slow motion. There was really some nice footage coming out of this. So again, it makes it just that much more usable to be my only camera that I'm gonna take on travels or my everyday carry. Now they've added a lot of small upgrades as well. They've increased the size of the viewfinder. They've added more focus points up to 425. They've added Bluetooth. They've added a faster memory card slot. I think it's a UHS 1 card slot now. The 4 buttons that are on the back are now flush mount, so they're not an annoyance. You're not hitting them with your thumbs when you're moving around the back, and swiping through the touchscreen makes it a little bit easier. They've also removed the D-pad on the back and caused it to have a little bit more grip when holding. Now, for some of you, that's actually going to be a big gripe. For me, I found it to be a little bit of an annoyance, as I really, really like that D-pad, especially for viewing some of the images that you've shot and scrolling through menus and things like that. They say it's replaced by a swiping abilities and a pinch to zoom touchscreen on the back, but I've always found that to be a little bit annoying, and I especially found that a bit cumbersome and not as accurate as I'd like with this. So I do miss that D-pad, but I do appreciate the grip that you have on it when holding it. Another small upgrade they've done is they've added another ND filter stop. So it now goes from about 3 stops to 4 stops of controlled light dimming with those built-in ND filters. Now I love that feature, and I think it's so usable, and I think every camera should have built-in ND filters because they do it so well and it makes it so convenient for us. But the biggest gripe I have with these ND filters are they're only available for stills and not available for video. Why Fuji would do this just baffles me. I don't know. It's a big gripe because I would love built-in ND filters for video, and that's really where I use my ND filters more. And have to carry around external ND filters just so I can shoot at 24 frames per second in daylight just makes it so inconvenient and an issue, so I really hate that. I hope they change that and make those available in further firmware updates. If it's a firmware thing that they can do, I don't know if it's a hardware issue or whatnot, but it is a really big gripe for me. I hate that feature about the ND filters. Now, in talking about ergonomics and design, that's where this camera really shines, and because it has that old school analog vibe to it. You want to change the shutter speed quickly? Well, you just turn a dial. You want to change the ISO? You just lift that dial up and again, change that around. Front lens has an aperture control ring that is clickable and feels just oh so smooth to be able to change on the fly. I really, really like it. As well as a customizable focus ring that's also on the lens. Pair that with front and back manual control dials that both have customizable push button design. I find that to really be nice because I would program my back shutter dial to be a push button focus lock, and for those back button focus shooters like myself, it's just a joy to be able to do that. I can also change the AEL, AFL button on the back to also be controlled by back button focus, but it was a bit of a stretch for my thumb. Even things like changing the focus settings from single shot to continuous to manual, there's a small switch on the side so you can have that tactile feel to change that on the fly. And overall, I just really like it. It's a joy to shoot. And most of the lower end cameras, not saying that this is a lower end camera, but a lot of lower end cameras at this price point and below, to change things like your focus system or your focus settings, you'd have to go into 2 or 3 different setting modes in the menu system to get to that. And this has so many analog and controllable, customizable buttons that you don't need to do that. And it makes it a really nice, pleasant joy to shoot. If you've played around with any of the X100 cameras, you will know how fantastic the hybrid viewfinders are. It has that old school feel of an optical viewfinder that I love so much, and I love shooting with the modern day design of an inlaid digital interface that you could see all your settings and change things on the fly without having to peek at the back screen when you're changing. And I just absolutely love it. It's really a pleasant experience to shoot with. There is a new sensor in this. It's the 4th generation 26.1 megapixel X-Trans CMOS sensor. It's actually the same sensor that's in the X Pro 3. Now, when I shot with the X Pro 3, although very briefly, I really loved the images that were coming out of it. And I also love the images and video that's coming out of this. That sensor is really nice and crispy and just vibrant overall. And I will say, whenever I shoot Fuji, I always know the Fuji images that I'm gonna get out of it. And I'm always pleasantly surprised by them. I'm not a huge Fuji guy. I've owned maybe 2 or 3 of them, but I will say the Fuji files and their sensors are so vibrant with colors. In the end of the day, the product that you get from Fuji is just so beautiful, so crisp, so saturated and vibrant with lush colors. I think that's the best way I can describe it. You can tweak colors in a lot of files and posts, but with Fuji files, I just know what I'm getting, and I know the product that I can get at the end is just really stunning, and I really love it. This sensor is no different. I really give them kudos for this. So I talked about some pros, I talked about some cons, but I really want to get to the essence of this camera, and I think that's what many photographers and tech reviewers miss when they're talking about the X100V and the X100 line in general. But this camera, you really get a vibe when you pick it up, and I think there's something to be said for that. In the end of the day, I found myself shooting more often, more images, more video, and I found myself carrying this camera more than I would other cameras on an almost daily basis. And that's what photography is all about. It's capturing the images, remembering the memories, freezing them in time for eternity, and having a camera on you that you're excited to do that, and it brings you joy throughout the whole process. And that's what I think this X100V it stood out to me most, is that I really just loved shooting it. It brought me immense joy having this camera with me all the time. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of reviews. And I will say that there is some, monetary value to that. I could buy a new camera and it could sit on my desk for 3 weeks, and I realize I don't really need it, end up returning it. And with this X100, the exact inverse happened. I bought it not thinking I would use it a lot. I really wanted to test it out and see if I liked it, and I found myself shooting it so much more than the other cameras in my lineup right now. And for that, I really say, if you're in the market for any type of travel, compact, hybrid video stills camera, and you don't mind a fixed focal prime length that shoots really beautiful images, I would say you definitely need to take a look at the X100V. I love this camera, I really do. I can't talk highly enough about it. Sure, there are some shortcomings and some things that I'm really looking forward to in the 6th and 7th and 8th generations, but I think Fuji's really dialed it in and nailed just a really beautiful camera that I love to shoot. That's all I got for this camera review. I hope it brought you some value. If it did, hit me with a thumbs up and a subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.